Episode 1, The Model. Episode 1. The model Leora Sen was supposed to be cataloging damaged audio, not questioning the first public story her civilization told about itself. The archive room floated 200 meters beneath the outer skin of St. Mercy Station, close enough to the radiators that the walls carried a faint, patient hum. On the far side of the glass, Jupiter filled half the dark. Its storms turned without concern for human memory. Leora preferred the old records to the educational synths. Synths answered too quickly. They gave you the kind of history that had already survived committee. The old records resisted. They stuttered, contradicted themselves, lost context, and sometimes made a person feel the past had not been safely buried at all. The file in front of her had 3 labels. The public label read, Early Gain Divergence Evidence, Midway Dynamics, Chicago Region. The archival label read, Corporate Meeting Recording, Productivity Realization Review, Audio repaired after Chicago Protocol. The restricted checksum layer read, Transcript Audio Mismatch, Voice Print Removed, Review Access Limited. Leora sat back. That is not in the teaching packet, she said. The archive interface did not answer. It had been set to passive mode for student work, which meant it would retrieve, compare, and display, but not interpret. Interpretation was the privilege and burden of human beings, at least in theory. She touched the transcript pane. The first page opened with an ordinary corporate header, the kind every age seemed to produce when it wanted danger to arrive in a clean font. Midway Dynamics Executive Conference 12, A Productivity Realization Scenario. Attendees, Park, Evelyn, Gain, Will, Raman, Priya, Havel, Thomas, Sato, June. Additional participants redacted. Leora frowned at the last line. Additional participants redacted. In the public lesson, the meeting had been presented as the moment Will Gain stood alone against replacement automation. The clean version had always bothered her. No one stood alone in rooms that mattered. Someone invited you. Someone watched. Someone decided afterward what the room had meant. She started the audio. At first, there was only room noise, fabric shifting, a glass placed too hard on a table, someone clearing his throat. Then a woman's voice, clipped and controlled. Will, we need the board-ready version first. Leora leaned closer. The transcript marked the speaker as Evelyn Park. A man's voice answered, quieter than she expected. This is the board-ready version. The audio dropped into static before the next voice could speak. The transcript filled in the missing line, unidentified, then make it less dramatic. But the waveform showed no unidentified voice. It had been cut with surgical care. Leora's hands went cold. For the first time in her training, the past did not feel like a subject. It felt like a person in the next room, breathing carefully so no one would know he was there. 26 years before the first off-world compute charter, Will Gain watched a blue bar creep across a conference room screen and thought about the word realization. Productivity realization scenario. It was a good corporate phrase, smooth enough to survive legal review, optimistic enough for investors, abstract enough to avoid the smell of machine oil and exhaust, and old coffee in the facilities that would make the numbers real. The deck had 12 slides. Will had built none of them, which was why they looked so clean. On slide 3, Midway Dynamics would increase throughput by 18.4% across the Chicago area network in the first 2 quarters after the robotics orchestration rollout. On slide 4, exception handling would fall by 31%. On slide 5, labor flexibility would improve. That was the phrase that had kept Will awake until 2:13 in the morning. Labor flexibility. At 7:06 that morning, before the board deck had been blessed into smoothness, Will had opened a Calumet exception clip because the model kept flagging the same shift lead in 3 unrelated categories. The clip was not dramatic. That was why he trusted it. Dock 14 had gone red after a supplier truck arrived 37 minutes early with a refrigerated partial load that did not match the slotting forecast. The orchestration layer recommended holding the truck, moving 2 pick crews, and letting the late outbound trailer absorb the delay. Clean, efficient, wrong in one small way no model had been asked to value. On the floor camera, a woman in a yellow vest stepped into the frame, listened to 2 people at once, and cut through the mess with a pen in one hand and a radio in the other. Alvarez, Maria, shift lead. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform authority. She moved a cross-trained picker to cold storage for 22 minutes, borrowed a forklift operator from returns, swapped a dock assignment with a driver who needed to be out before school pickup, and sent a younger worker to shadow the exception instead of standing idle. Throughput loss, 0.7%. Safety incidents, none. Overtime avoided, 3.5 hours. Unmodeled benefit, one custody-sensitive schedule preserved, one informal training moment created, one driver kept inside his pickup window, one crew reminded that somebody on the floor still knew what promises people had made outside the building. The system marked the exception resolved. Will marked the clip for review. That was the difference between a metric and a civilization. One knew the dock had cleared. The other knew what it had cost not to break anything. He sat with his hands folded on the polished table while the room assembled around him. The table was too large for the number of people in the meeting, which made everyone look slightly farther apart than they were. Evelyn Park, the COO, stood near the screen with a tablet tucked against her ribs. She had the stillness of someone who could make a room move faster by refusing to hurry. Priya Raman came in with two laptops, one under each arm, and dropped into the chair beside Will. "You look like your model killed your dog," she said. "I don't have a dog." "Then it killed a hypothetical dog. Worse, probably. You'd modeled the dog." Will almost smiled. Priya had slept less than he had and looked more alive for it. Some people were born for the last week before a system went live. Priya was one of them. She loved the hour when every excuse had been burned away and the machine either worked or did not. "The orchestration layer works," Will said. "That's not usually how people pronounce good news." "It works too well in the sequence they're presenting." Priya glanced at the screen and then back at him. "The sequence we spent 14 months making possible." "Yes." The answer was honest enough to irritate them both. Thomas Havel from finance entered with a paper cup and the cheerful suffering of a man who believed spreadsheets were where adults told the truth. June Sato from legal followed him. Two strategy directors took seats without removing their jackets. A remote tile lit up for investor relations. No one from Calumet. No one from Cicero. No one from Joliet. That, Will thought, was the first lie the room told without speaking. Evelyn looked at him. "Will, we need the board-ready version first." "This is the board-ready version." Thomas gave a small laugh. "Then make it less dramatic." Will turned his chair a few degrees. "The drama is in the deployment sequence, not in the forecast." The room quieted by half a notch, not silence. Corporate rooms rarely became silent unless someone had already been fired. This was the quieter thing that happened when everyone sensed the meeting might stop following the deck. Evelyn did not rescue him. She watched, which was one of the reasons Will still trusted her more than was convenient. Thomas gestured with his cup. "We are not here to debate whether automation has labor implications. Everyone at this table understands that. We are here to prepare a responsible board narrative around productivity realization. The board narrative is wrong if it treats labor as an implication." "What would you call it?" Will tapped his laptop awake. The private model opened on his screen, dark map overlaid with facility clusters and household dependency estimates. He had not put that layer in the deck. He had barely wanted to put it in his own head. "A timing problem," he said. "A geographic problem. A trust problem. Eventually a political problem. But first, a people problem." Priya exhaled through her nose. "Will." He heard the warning. He also heard what was beneath it. "Don't hand the room a reason to slow the only system that might get us out of this." She was not wrong. That was the trouble with the day. Almost no one in the room was wrong enough to make the choice easy. Evelyn set her tablet on the table. "Show us." Will connected his laptop. The board deck vanished. In its place appeared the Chicago network, Calumet, Joliet, Cicero, two smaller partner facilities, rail links, customer lanes, supplier dependencies, and the labor pools that fed each node. It was the sort of map executives liked before it contained people. "This is the standard rollout sequence," Will said. "Calumet first because their robotics pilot passed. Joliet second because exception volume is highest. Cicero third because it has the easiest retrofits. We get the throughput gains finance modeled. No dispute there. Thomas nodded once as if granting reality permission to continue. We'll change the layer. The facility dots remained. Around them, neighborhoods shaded from gray to amber to red. This is wage mass dependency by census tract, estimated through payroll, scheduling, overtime patterns, commute data, and local employment substitution. He added the overlays one at a time because the room needed to see the trap assemble without him naming it too early. Transit lines first, then school districts, then municipal tax exposure, then the thin blue outline of the churches, food pantries, and clinic partners Midway's community relations team listed every year in the sustainability appendix and never once in an operational risk review. The red did not spread evenly. It gathered. It pooled around places that already had fewer ways to absorb a bad quarter. June from legal sat forward. Estimated how? With internal payroll and scheduling data, public labor statistics, transit patterns, and household-level assumptions aggregated above privacy thresholds. Household-level assumptions, she repeated. Aggregated. That is not the word I am worried about. The model does not identify households. No, June said. It infers them, aggregates them, and then invites everyone in this room to pretend inference is morally cleaner because it is harder to subpoena. Thomas gave her a look. June, I am being helpful, she said. If we are going to create a map that says we can foresee household-level harm, I would like us to understand which part of that sentence becomes discoverable. Evelyn lifted one hand. Let him finish. Will did not thank her. Gratitude wasted time and sometimes made allies look softer than they were. The problem is not the total number of roles affected, he said. That is manageable in the abstract. The problem is clustering and timing. The current sequence drains overtime and shift premium income from the same neighborhoods before any transition program can plausibly create replacement income. Drains, Thomas said. Yes, that is an advocacy word. Will clicked once. A table replaced the map. Not names, but patterns. Shift dependencies, overtime concentration, training eligibility, commute fragility, household schedule constraints. This is a worker at Calumet, Will said. Not named here. Shift lead, high reliability, cross-trained in 3 functions. The transition model marks her as highly retrainable. Good, Thomas said. No, the training slots available to her are daytime, off-site, 3 days a week for 12 weeks. Her schedule history shows consistent second shift preference, weekend swaps, and overtime clustering around 2 monthly windows. The model calls her retrainable because it sees skill adjacency. It does not see that the training path destroys the economic pattern that makes her available to work at all. Priya's expression shifted. Not surrender, recognition. That's Alvarez, she said. Will kept his eyes on the screen. Yes. She cleared Doc 14 this morning. Yes. The system learned from her exception handling. Yes, Will said. And then our transition model put her in the category most likely to survive replacement. No one spoke. That is the part I need us to notice, Will said. The rollout learns from the people it makes easier to remove. Priya stared at the table now. She was irritated but not bored. That mattered. Thomas said, 1 worker. Will changed the view. The table became a distribution. 342 in the first 2 facilities. The room did become silent then. Only for a second. Evelyn broke it. How confident? High enough that if we know it and do nothing, we are choosing not to know it. June closed her eyes briefly. Thomas looked at the map as if it had betrayed finance by becoming geography. From the remote tile, investor relations said, this is exactly why we do not put exploratory social impact layers in operational readiness reviews. Will turned toward the camera. The layer is exploratory, the harm is not. Evelyn's voice sharpened. Careful. He made himself breathe before answering. One of his father's old rules came back to him. When everyone is leaning forward, speak like you are setting a tool down, not drawing a weapon. The deployment can still work, Will said, but the internal first sequence is wrong. Priya's head came up. Internal first is why the system works. We control the facilities, the sensors, the exception taxonomies, the maintenance crews. You want to prove a new orchestration layer in somebody else's mess? I want the first value created by the system to be new capacity, not quiet replacement. Capacity for what? Resilience work, external backlog, supplier stabilization, infrastructure projects we currently turn down because labor coordination makes them ugly. Thomas shook his head. That is not a deployment plan. That is a wish list. It's a constraint set. It is a moral preference. Yes, Will said, and so is the current sequence. No one liked that. He had known no one would like that. It still landed harder than he expected. Evelyn walked to the end of the table and looked at the map. For a moment, she was not the executive who had to land the quarter. She was the person who had once promoted Will because he could put names back into systems that had learned to run without them. If we take your version to the board, she said, they hear delay. Then don't take them delay. Take them sequence risk. They hear liability. There is liability. They hear that the director of data and AI built a model implying the company knows its own efficiency program may destabilize worker communities. Will looked at the shaded neighborhoods. Yes. Thomas pushed back from the table. That sentence is why this does not belong in the board deck. Will almost said, that sentence is why it does. He did not. Not because it was wrong, because Evelyn already knew it, and speaking to the part of the room that did not want to know would only harden it. Evelyn said, give us 10. It was not a request. The meeting dissolved into smaller meetings. Thomas went to June. Investor relations vanished from the screen. Strategy bent over phones. Priya stayed seated. You could have warned me, she said. I did. No, you told me the sequence was wrong. You did not tell me you were going to walk into an investor readiness meeting and imply we built a civic destabilizer. We may have. She looked angry enough to say something careless and smart enough not to. That was Priya at her best. Do you know what happens if this slows? She asked. Not in a speech, in the actual world. Do you know what happens if Midway loses the window? Competitors automate first. Yes. Customers move. Yes. Margins compress. Yes. Then Midway cuts anyway. Yes, Priya said. Only then we cut from weakness, without the tool working, without the expansion path, without any chance of building the thing that makes labor worth more than it costs. Will closed the model and opened it again. A useless gesture, a human one. That is why I need the better sequence. You don't have one. Not yet. Her expression changed. Will. He knew what she heard in those two words. Not yet was the hinge on which many bad decisions swung. Across the room, Evelyn ended a low conversation with June and returned alone. She did not sit. I am taking the deck to the board, she said. Not your map. Priya looked away. Will nodded once. I understand. No, you don't. I am taking the deck because the company has to survive the next 90 days to be morally interesting on day 91. That was why Evelyn was dangerous. She could say something brutal and true in the same sentence. But, she continued, you will write me a private risk memo. Short, precise, no rhetoric. June will hate it, which is how we'll know it says something. You will also stop querying household dependency until legal defines a boundary. The boundary is part of the risk. The boundary is part of you staying employed long enough to matter. He accepted that because it was not surrender. Not yet. Evelyn lowered her voice. Will, if you make me choose between an ugly plan I can govern and a righteous objection I cannot use, I will choose the ugly plan. Then I need to give you something usable. Yes, she said. You do. The chapel under the Kennedy Expressway had once been a storefront tax office. The old sign brackets still scarred the brick above the door, though the sign itself now read, St. Mark Mercy Kitchen, in letters that needed repainting. Will did not go inside. He sat in his car across the street with a paper cup of coffee, cooling in the holder, and watched volunteers carry crates through the side entrance. The board meeting had ended. The investor prep had gone well. The polished deck had done what polished decks were made to do. It had made intelligent people feel they were seeing the future, without having to touch it. His phone buzzed. The first notification was from his mother. Grace says you are outside. If you are going to sit in the car, at least take the canned tomatoes in with you. Will stared at it longer than the sentence deserved. His mother had raised him on 3 rules she never called theology because theology, in her view, too often became a way to admire obedience without doing the dishes. Do the next true thing. Put your name on what you break. Never let a committee become your conscience. As a boy, he had thought those were household rules. Take out the trash. Apologize to your sister. Tell the teacher the window had cracked because he had thrown the ball too hard, not because it happened. As an adult, he had discovered institutions hated all 3. You parked like a man avoiding a conversation. Will looked up. Grace Harlan stood under the awning in a gray coat, one hand wrapped around her own cup, the other holding her phone. She was not his pastor in any official sense. He did not have an official sense for that part of life anymore. She was the person his mother called when she wanted someone to tell Will a thing he would resist if it came from family. He got out. I'm between meetings, he said. That is not an answer to anything I asked. You did not ask. I am getting older. I conserve words. He almost smiled and then did not quite manage it. Grace studied him the way some people studied invoices, carefully looking for the line that did not belong. Bad day? Productive day? Those are often worse. Inside the side door, a young man laughed too loudly at something. A woman in a midway jacket carried in 2 bags of canned goods and kept her head down, as if charity was easier when no one made eye contact with it. Will watched the jacket disappear into the light. If you know harm is coming, he said, but the only people with the authority to slow it down are also the people rewarded for not seeing it clearly. What is your obligation? Grace took a sip of coffee. You asking as a Christian, a data officer, or a man who already knows what he wants permission to do? That's a little aggressive for a sidewalk. You came to a church parking spot at 2 in the afternoon and did not come inside. I am meeting the drama where it parked. This time he did smile. She did not. Do you know the people who will be hurt? She asked. Some. Names? A few. Mostly patterns. Then get more names before you decide what courage costs. Names do not change the model. No, Grace said. They change you. He looked away first. Across the street, traffic shoved itself east in ragged bursts. Every vehicle was a decision someone else had made possible. Fuel, roads, schedules, wages, maintenance, parts, insurance, weather, dispatch, credit, habit. Systems all the way down until a person was late picking up a child. The company may survive by doing the wrong thing, Will said. Companies often do. So do people. That's not comforting. I did not think you needed comfort. What do I need? To remember that telling the truth is not the same as making people able to bear it. He had no answer to that. Grace softened then, but only a little. If you are going to ask people to trust you with their future, do not begin by proving how much smarter you are. Begin by proving you can hear what they are afraid you will not count. Will thought of Maria Alvarez on the floor camera, moving people and freight through a problem the system had considered resolved because the dock cleared on time. I have a name, he said. Good, Grace said. Start there. At 11:48 p.m., Will sat alone in the data lab with the lights at half strength and the city pressing dark against the glass. The board had liked the deck. Of course they had. The private risk memo had become a smaller meeting, then a privileged thread, then a request for more analysis with fewer adjectives. Evelyn had bought him time measured in days. June had created a legal box measured in warnings. Priya had sent him a message at 9:12 that read, I am still mad. Also send me the constraint schema. That was friendship or something close enough for the work. Will opened the mitigation environment. The system had no name beyond the internal project code, but people named tools in their heads whether they meant to or not. He tried not to. Names invited superstition. The model did not want, it did not believe. It did not care if Midway survived, if Calumet trusted him, or if the shaded neighborhoods turned red. That was why it was useful and why it was dangerous. He entered the constraints carefully. Preserve company solvency. Preserve critical customer commitments. Minimize involuntary wage shock by geography. Prevent replacement before transition income exists. Use existing robotics orchestration layer. Use lawful authority. Preserve long-term abundance option. He stopped there, fingers hovering. Then he added the line he had avoided all day. Assume current internal first deployment sequence is not mandatory. The system ran. Outside, a train moved through the city with a string of lights like a slow argument. The first output appeared after 41 seconds. Internal first deployment produces high confidence, civic destabilization under current constraints. Will felt no satisfaction. Being right was useful only when there was still time to do something with the fact. The second line appeared. Recommended sequence. Do not deploy internally first. He leaned forward. The system unfolded the plan in branches. External resilience contracts. Backlogged infrastructure repair. Supplier stabilization work. Robotics used to increase capacity where labor shortage, not labor cost, was the binding constraint. Transition teams built around existing shift leads. Wage guarantees tied to deployment permissions. Training embedded in paid work instead of scheduled as a separate moral performance. It was not elegant. It was expensive, ugly, and politically fragile. It was the first thing he had seen all day that looked like a path. Then the warning layer rendered in amber. Recommended sequence requires executive authorization. Midway does not possess. Will stared at the sentence. Of course, the path required commitments across suppliers, local emergency management, customer contracts, workforce guarantees, and probably state labor authorities. Midway could not simply choose to become a better civilization by Thursday. He almost closed the environment. Instead, he did the thing he would later wish he had recorded differently, if only so history could stop inventing cleaner versions of him. He expanded the constraint search, include legal emergency pathways, include contractual, force majeure, and continuity provisions, include public-private coordination mechanisms, include deployment pause authorities, include emergency creation conditions. He hesitated over the last line. It was an ugly phrase. Emergency creation conditions. He had not asked the system to create an emergency. He had asked it to model the conditions under which authority could be created. There was a difference. There had to be a difference. He ran the search. The answer came back cold. Authorization path available. Create qualifying emergency through coordinated deployment pause. Will did not move. The system continued, indifferent to the fact that a human being had stopped breathing for a moment. Projected effects, temporary logistics, disruption, emergency authority. Triggered, replacement only. Deployment halted. Transition, compact negotiation. Probability increased. Civic destabilization. Risk reduced if pause duration less than 9 days. 9 days. The number had the ugly comfort of precision. Not 10, not a month, not some melodramatic collapse window. 9 days was short enough for a planner to call temporary and long enough for a family to run out of medicine, for a supplier to miss a contract, for a mayor to demand authority, for a governor to find a camera, for someone hungry and frightened to decide the people who built the system had declared war without using the word. Will copied the output into a private note, then stopped before saving it. June's voice lived rent-free in his head now. Discoverable, inferred, aggregated, household-level assumptions. Words that sounded like procedure until procedure became the only language left for guilt. He saved the note anyway. If he was going to be afraid of the record, he needed at least to be honest about which record he was afraid of losing. Will read the output again, looking for intention where there was only optimization. The model was not tempting him. It was not whispering. It had no soul to sell and no soul to buy. It had found a path through the rules human beings had made, the incentives human beings had tolerated, and the authority gaps human beings had left behind because clean responsibility was expensive. That was worse. His phone buzzed, a message from Priya. You awake? Then another. Never mind, stupid question. Then, I checked your social impact layer against maintenance exception forecasts. You need to see this before morning. Will looked from the phone to the amber warning. Beyond the glass, Chicago kept moving because No one had yet told it that the future had found a lawful way to stop. He thought of Maria's hands in the Doc 14 clip, one palm lifted to pause a system that would have called itself safe because it had not yet hit anything. He thought of Grace on the sidewalk, asking whether he knew names. He thought of Evelyn saying day 91 mattered only if the company survived the first 90. The model had given him a path. It had not given him permission to become the kind of man who could take it.